Many farms are turning to goats to help manage overgrown brush. Today, Adam Ledvina is going to show us how he's using goats and through different paddocks to move the goats around and keep the area that he wants them to browse into a specific spot. We'll join Adam live here in a minute with Iowa Kiko goats from Chelsea, Iowa, to learn more about his process. Good afternoon. My name is Greg Paddock. I'm the Next Generation Director for Practical Farmers of Iowa. Accompanying me behind the scenes is providing technical support is Megan Filbert. Today we are going to, well, actually, I want to take a minute and talk about our sponsors. Without the support of these sponsors, our virtual field day season would not be possible. This year featuring over 60 different virtual field days. And because of their support, we can offer them free of charge. I'd like to thank Premier One for being our field day sponsor today. At Premier One, they've been providing electric fencing supplies, products for sheep, goats, and poultry for over 40 years. Practical Farmers of Iowa is a farmer-led nonprofit based out of Ames, where we specialize in farmer-to-farmer knowledge sharing and farmer-led research, with the mission of equipping farmers to build resilient farms and communities. All are welcomed at PFI, and we invite you to learn more about our organization and check out our vast collection of resources at practicalfarmers.org. Today's field day, we possibly are going to run a little bit long because we have some pre-recorded video so we could capture different parts of Adam's farm. So we might run a little bit long on that, but we'll finish on time and then give you the opportunity to catch some extra pieces at the end. If you have any questions for Adam during the field day, please put them in the comment box on Facebook, and I will relay those back to Adam. At the conclusion of the event, we've got a online survey that we really encourage you to participate in to help provide us feedback so we can continue to make these great events. So with that, I will turn it over to Adam to share what he's doing with goats. All right, there, Adam?
There we go. Yep.
All right, yeah. Perfect.
So I started raising goats about 7 years ago, and just kind of a hodgepodge, different breeds, mostly for the brush management. And I kind of did contracts around the state. I did some seasonal work with the DNR, so I was kind of working with them a little bit from the beginning. And yeah, eventually after trying out boar goats and savannas and different dairy goats, all kinds of different things, switched over to Kikos. And they just worked out really well with me for the brush management, and slowly kind of started doing bigger contracts from basically from Des Moines to the Mississippi area. And yeah, so I've gotten I have over 100 rolls of electric net fencing that we surround anything from 5 acres to 30 acres, and get a pretty good idea of what works and what doesn't work with this electric net fencing. And we rotate our goats every 1 to 3 weeks depending. And so yeah, we kind of really rely on this electric net fencing. But yeah, so about 7 years into this game.
Awesome. Well, we'll have Megan cue up the first video then.
All right, so here we've got your standard 4x4 sheep and goat fence, which you'll find at your local farm store, Tyson's, Farm Fleet, whatever. But that's kind of what people gravitate towards for goats, because that's what's at your standard farm store. But I don't care for the 4x4 fence, because if you're having young kids up until a certain age, they can still put their head through, because that's the whole point of getting a 4x4. The regular 6x6 is you're going to get adults are going to get a head stuck, and so you go 4x4, so adults can't get their head through. But the kid can still put his head through and get stuck and has those horns stuck there. And so now you've got a young kid that's very fragile, bones in the neck and everything. So like, it's going to be struggling, and now that kid is crying, and it's attracting predators, and that's just a recipe for disaster. So I like to go with a different style of 12-inch vertical stays, and I'll show you this fence over here. So this is the permanent fence that I like to go with. This maker is Stay Tough, and the model is Goat Tough. Basically, you have 12-inch vertical stays, and it starts off at, I think, 3-inch, then it gets to 4-inch, then it gets to 5-inch spacing up here. And so the goats can put their head through, even the adults with pretty big horns can put their head through the fence, eat on the other side, pull their head back through, and that works out well because they don't get their head stuck. You don't have to walk your fences every day to make sure nobody's got their head stuck, but also it cleans up the other side of the fence so that when you have birds landing on here dropping seeds of, say, mulberry trees and whatnot, they are, the goats can clean up all those trees on the other side, and you're not getting that tree growing through your fence and ruining it over time. And, in 20 years, if you've got goats on your property, you should still have a good standing fence. The other nice thing on your typical fence, your 4x4, your 6x6, whatever your fence might be, the typical farmer would do steel wood every 10 feet or so. Well, this fence, you can go, they recommend you going 20 feet between steel T-posts. You don't need to put those woods in there, especially on flatter ground. In some of our rougher places, we put more posts in there, but you can go 20 feet and just do steels, and you save a lot of money there. The fence itself is a little bit cheaper than your 4x4, and the supplies you need are a little cheaper. It is high tinsel, so that's a little harder to work with, but the end product is worth it. I like to invest in the beginning, save time, and it's a lot nicer product in the end. So I'm a big fan of that. So like your young kids can still stick their head through here. They're not going to get their head stuck, and you don't have to like pry them out of there. They just pull through just fine. So your young kids at the bottom, just as they grow, it spaces out a little bit. And then over here on the braces, you do want to double brace as much as you can, especially if running a long stretch, because these double rolls, these 660-foot rolls are, if you're pulling that far, you want to make sure you're pulling to get something that's in there pretty tight. And your 4x4 is going to come on a 330-foot roll. So, and they just weigh a lot too. Your 4x4 rolls just have, you've got every 4 inches you've got a vertical stay. That's just a lot of weight on that fence. So I've heard of a guy over, I think he said 5 or 6 years, his fences started sagging. Like you look from T-post to T-post to T-post, you got to droop back up to the T, droop back up to the T, and these fences are just solid straight. I've heard of a guy having these for, I think he's almost at 20 years with them and still look like the day he put them in, versus the 4x4s. He said he's replaced them. I do have the 4x4s because, I'm learning too. And we started with the 4x4 and then we learned that this stuff's better. So we've got both. So we'll kind of run our own experiment and see what that looks like. But there are places for that 4x4. But most of our runs are now going to be this Stay Tough fence, this 12-inch vertical stays. The whole perimeter I like to have in permanent fence, and then your internal fences is what you want to do your electric net or your poly wire. I just want to make sure if they get from paddock to paddock without me wanting to move them there, that's okay. Not ideal, but it's fine. If they get out of my pastures and eat my neighbor's corn, that's not fine. Luckily, I've got good neighbors, but not everybody does, and that can be pretty big issues, especially if your animals don't want to come back home and they're out there for, who knows, it's July. They get out now, you're not going to find them for a while if they don't want to be found. So.
Well, perfect. Adam, anything to add on the permanent fencing before we move over to electric netting?
I mentioned in there's places for that 4x4 versus the high tinsel Stay Tough fence. If you're in like really steep terrain up and down, it's easier to bend that the galvanized wire versus the high tinsel. You want to run a little bit longer stretches. Straighter stretches are nice. We've got it going through curves and or through hills and it's all right. But that would be the only time I would say the 4x4 kind of is nicer. And then we built a new corral this year, and I've got the 4x4 in the corral, like on the runs in the corral. And that's just, it's a little bit tighter in there, especially when animals are rubbing up against there. I like to have it almost like nice smooth. The 4x4 is a little smoother for those heavy use areas, but otherwise that Stay Tough is, the lifesaver.
Fantastic. That's great to hear. Well, we will have Megan queue up the electric netting because I know we had a question come across from David about how to fix sagging. I know you're going to cover that in that section. So
yep.
We'll jump over there.
When you're ending your second to last roll or any straight line fence, I like to just pull that as tight as you can, and you don't want to have it kind of drooping. So you pull it as tight as you can. It's going to droop a little bit until I get a new fence on it, but this is kind of starting your next roll of fence. So this one has the 2 strings on it, which is handy. 1 string in the middle would be a little sloppier, but most of my fences probably have 1 string. You need a string for something, you pull one real quick. You don't need both, but 2 is nice. So when you unwind it like that, you just drop that train, and I'm about 6 foot, so there should be about 6 feet there. It's 12 feet doubled up, so I'm about the perfect size for messing with this stuff. I've had some shorter friends use it, and really got to hold it above their head, but it works. So you want to find the top roll, so it has the braid on it. You can see that kind of a braid there. And this one has the strings on it. Well, I ended with a string, so I'm actually going to flip it around. This kind of goes in organization. Some people pull off their strings. I used to pull off my strings. Well, then I'm always looking for a string, and I have 20 of them in my pocket. Well, now I just leave them they come on the fence, so just leave them there. So they're always there. Anyway, so I'm going to start with the naked pole. There's no string on there, that braid, and I'm just going to drop it there and lay out a little bit, one at a time. But I'm going to come back and tie that off proper before I get going, because I can take the slack out. That'll be my tension on this. So just stick that in the ground, and I do prefer the single spike. They have double spike, which everyone assumes that is a better pull, and it can be, especially if you don't bend over a lot. But when you step that in, it's great. But if you step in, this is a good soil here. If you step into hard clay, like it hasn't rained for a while, if this was hard clay, you start twisting that rod, or you step it in halfway and you hit a rock and you keep going, you twist it, and now it's like pulling a barbed hook out of the ground, and it's always going to be twisted. You're never going to get that straight again. So a lot of people I know that had to step in post eventually cut that off anyway. It costs you more in the beginning. You get tangled up with it, and then eventually you end up getting rid of it. So I started with the double spike, but I've gone to single spike now, and I grip it halfway down and just kind of push it in the ground, and it's no big deal. So over here, I want to get those as close to each other as I can. I tie the braids together first. Some people hook those together. I like to use them as a tool, and they're there. You might as well wrap it, and you just clip together, and that's your conduction. That's what conducts your electricity through it. And then with this string, just kind of tie that around, and you want to tie the string wherever the goats are not, so they don't nibble on your string and then tie it. But again, that's why we do that wrap around there. That's your security. That's your insurance. If this string fails, that braid's going to do the job. So now we get to roll, basically. So just pick up that roll, and it should just come unwound easy for you. If this was picked up proper, you can lay it out just fine. Just dropping it like that. A lot of times I'll take my left arm or non-dominant arm, hook that underneath, and you just hold it like that, and I can just walk backwards, and this should more or less unravel itself, and I'm just walking backwards and letting it do the job. That's good. So that does, sometimes you get that. So that is just tangled up a little bit, and it's a quick, easy, there's a little stick in there that tangled that up, but that's fine. Just undo that. That mess should fix itself here. If I back up, and there we go, just fine. Just keep dropping it like that. I like to drop the whole roll and then go back and start stepping them in or sticking them in. I suppose dropping it one at a time is maybe going to prevent that catching, but sometimes I'll set out 40 of these rolls in a day, and you get lazy. So I typically don't know where you're going to end, so I I just drop the end roll and I go back and start putting it in. But since I know this is my ending point, I'm going to install this fence here, because if I start getting close to it and there's a little bit of slack, I can bend that fence out of the way and basically tighten it up, because you don't want any droop, any low point that they can jump over. So I'm just going to tie this to the fence here. And I mean, you can tie it to a post, whatever, but this fence is just as strong as the post, really, when it comes to this electric net fence. So I just tie that like a shoestring. And I mean, you can double that knot or tie a different knot you want. When you come back to pick these up and you're doing a bunch of rolls in a night, you want to be quick, pull that string and go. And it's a lot slicker to just have a shoestring knot. And this is already tied off, but typically if I have another fence that it's buttoned up against, undo that, clip them together. But when you're ending, I'm going to put a fencer right there, and you just hook that hot wire to there, and then to your ground rod, your ground to your ground. But yeah, so we'll go back to the top. So we just laid out the fence, and now we're coming back here to start stepping it in, or sticking it in. So I grab that, I try to have this all the way over to the vertical stay. And I think it's a little bit tighter that way, but you'll make sure that bottom wire is pulled as tight over as you can, and you stick it right in the ground. I mean, that is straight. They have different styles of fence that have basically a string vertical, and I don't think those work as well. They're not standing the fence up as much, so if you get any kind of hump, those sag a little bit. I've had a handful of those, and I've moved them on. I've retired. They call it, technically they call it sheep fence. They have a 42 that they call goat fence. I've had 42s. I haven't had goats jumping over 42-inch electric fences. This thing has 8,000 volts running through it. Their nose touches it once, they're not going to touch it again. And that extra 7 inches doesn't seem like much, but when I'm carrying 4 or 6 rolls over my shoulders and hiking it a mile into a timber to do a grazing job, that little bit of plastic and stainless steel wire, that weighs a lot more when you're walking back and forth those rolls, putting out 40, 50, 60 rolls on a job. So I go with the shorter fence and just make sure that voltage is cranked high. They get zapped, they don't mess with it. So step them all in. And that's pretty much the same all the way through. Not yet. All right. So this is the fencer that Premier One has for electric net, using with goats and sheep and whatnot. They used to have a different style, as like a briefcase, and they discontinued that, and they go with this now. And so you can kind of move that to the angle of the sun. In the summertime, I don't really worry about it too much, but during, getting closer towards winter, you don't have that facing the south. But it's got easy little push button right there. But so you stick your ground rod in, hook to there. That's not the ground rod they give you. It's just a piece of metal grounding rod in the ground. Aluminum would work better. That's what it comes with. And then your hot to your clip right there. And sometimes I'll hook that to the fence if I don't have a ground rod, because I would think that every T-post is grounded, and somebody could correct me on that. That might not be right, but every post is grounded. There should be a ground rod. It's just going to be a better connection if you actually have an aluminum or copper rod in the ground. But anyway, yeah, hook to there, and then push a button, make sure you're not touching it, and you're live. And that flashes, there's a red light or a green light. Red light means you're off a little bit. Green is good. Red is, at least it's still working. You want about 8,000 volts for goats. I would go down as low as 2,000 volts and still be comfortable enough. Once I get down to 1,000 volts, I don't know if I would trust it with goats. Cattle, I think it's recommended to do 2,000 volts. So goats are pretty hot, or they need it pretty hot in general. So 2,000 to 8,000 volts, and I'm pretty comfortable with that. So on this fence, we're just gonna do a standard pickup. I just have it tied here like just like a shoestring tie. And you like to have that on the outside of where your goats are at, because if they start nibbling on things, they pull that string and that comes undone. Now that's a little bit bigger gap there they could go through. But anyway, you just pick up your starting post. I hold that about right halfway. You can just hold that right in your hand, kind of tuck it between the braid and the pole, and you just pick up one post at a time, and you lay it into each other. You don't want to just start on the end and roll it, because you'd be rolling it forever. This way, you're picking up 12 feet at a time. These are 12-inch stays, or 12-inch between the fiberglass rods. So you basically just make a big train behind you, and you get towards the end, you pick it up, you just roll it up. And this, there's no goats here right now. You're looking on both sides of the fence. It's not, it hasn't been grazed on either side. We rotate every, last year we were doing every 3 weeks. That's and we rotate basically before those eggs can hatch. But now we're trying to get towards that rotating every week, which, you know, some people will rotate every day, and kudos to them. That is awesome. I don't quite have the manpower to do that right now. So we're doing it every 1 to 2 weeks, somewhere in there. But anyway, back to the fence. Then here, when you get to the end, I've got, this is kind of clipped in here. You just pop that clip apart, undo that, pull the string, kind of separate out the fences. Pick that roll back up. Sometimes I'll have somebody go ahead of me and pull all the posts out, and then I'll come up and pick up the fence so that you don't have that little, gets kind of confusing laying that down, but it works out just fine. And then you can either whip it up like that, or what I typically do, kind of drag it like that. And you can see if there's any sticks in there, pick out any sticks. This is a nice run between basically grass paddocks, but I go through a lot of timbers, and there's quite a bit of sticks that can get in there. Just kind of go in there. If they're caught, they're usually dry sticks. So I stand on the fence, I snap those sticks and pull them out little piece at a time. It's never that bad. But anyway, when you roll this up, you don't want to roll the sticks up first. You want to do that last. So you start down here, roll up that train as tight as you can. The tighter it is, the nicer, neater roll you're going to have. And you'll appreciate it, especially when it comes to storing it for the winter. It'll take up a lot less room. And then in the spring, it's starting out the roll like how the day it came in the mail. So that's nice. And I get these shipped to me from Premier One. So I've got these black strings that are going to tie around it. So I'm going to fish that around, get one of those strings, and tie that off tight. You go once is fine, but you're going to have that fence pushing against you. So sometimes I'll go around it twice, and see that stays a little better. Then I can tie that off. And then same thing over here. When you get these new from Premier, they usually come with two strings like this, and that's the best way to use them. To get that tight. Sometimes you want to sit on it, put a knee down on it, tie that tight, and there you go. And that is a nice tight roll. Sometimes if I lose a string, break a string, I'll go down to one string, and that's fine, but it's a little sloppier. Two is nice and tight. You don't have a lot of flop in there, and especially get all that debris out of there. It's not always going to be this pretty, but I'd say this is an ideal situation for picking it up. But yeah, pretty slick. So your best fence is probably going to be on a straight line if you can anchor the two ends, but and the reality is you're never really going to have that chance. You're going to be curving around trees, curving around a pasture. The earth isn't as square as we wish it was. But if you kind of just keep dropping those fences, you get to a point you want to end with your post, you know where you want your post to end. So if I want post to end right here, I don't want to stick all those in the ground and walk them away here because it might not reach. If those are both stuck in the ground, I might end right here. So I go to where I'm going to finish for sure, maybe tie this off. If I tie that off, I know that's where I want to finish. So then I can walk back here and I can stand that up, tighten it, stick it in the ground, and then go to this one. And it really doesn't matter if that is round or straight or zigzag. You might go whichever way. If you're wanting them in there and give more space, pull it this way. But we're just kind of round that off. And so now that is as tight as you can be. And a lot of times, if I'm going from this point to that point, and I've got, say it's a 100-foot run, and I've got 140 feet of fence, what I do with all that slack, there's a couple of different ways. Sometimes I'll zigzag it back and forth. Other times I'll kind of run it back along here, and just as long as it's tight is the main thing. But it doesn't matter what your fences look like, it's the purpose they're serving. So kind of do whatever you think works, but I don't like to roll it up and stick it in a corner there. I think that it's going to be zapping itself too many times. It's going to throw out the voltage, and I don't know what that really does, but I don't care to do it that way. I like to zigzag or just kind of tighten it into a circle. So as we were laying this fence out, we saw that there was a break in it, and I just did a square knot onto it. When you buy the fences from Premier One, they give you a splice kit, and those are probably better, but they come in a kit, and you have them somewhere in a toolbox in the truck maybe, or in your basement, wherever they might be, in the barn, and you don't have those on hand. So I just do a quick square knot, and that's good enough. As you can see, it did cinch up this 12-inch horizontal string to, well, the 6-inch or so. So that tightens that up. So here we've come to a water crossing and basically a low spot. So when you're using this electric net fencing, when you've got a low spot, you're going to have sag, you're going to have droop there, and you also you're going to have a low spot. So something I do if I have a low spot like that, I will take this stick or any stick, put that on top of your ground, or on top of the black wire. It's not hot, so that brings it down a little bit. I conveniently have a break right there. I would probably put it on that one, but anything that puts weight on there to bring it down to the ground. But then also here, so this sags a little bit, I just wrap that around there, and that tightened it up. And if I undid that here, I have a sag here. So that just drops down a little bit. And if you were worried about your goats jumping it, which I don't normally worry about that, but one might, then again, you just take that, wrap it around, and it tightens it up. And that can easily come undone. Another thing that I have considered doing is with that, taking like a twisty or anything that'll hold form, bring that together like that, tie it off right there, and you've got a tight fence. You make sure to take that out when you're rolled up, because you're going to get tangled and everything, and wherever you're going next, you're going to want a straight run. But it works pretty slick for something in a jiffy. But yeah, nice straight fence. So when I have guests at the farm or anybody who's getting into this stuff, I like to kind of teach them there is a proper way to step over the fence. So I always kick if the fence is off, of course, but I kick my heel over top and then my foot over, because if you try to cross like this, you catch that toe and you might fall over. You're stuck. Same thing, you might catch your second toe. So there's a good way and a bad way to step over the fence. Now I go with that 35-inch fence.
All right. Thanks for all of that information, Adam. There's a ton of stuff, and we have some questions that have come in. But I want to acknowledge it's 2:30, so if people need to jump off, we are recording this so that you can always come back and watch the recording later. But we'll answer some questions about the netting that have come up, and if you have more questions, put those in the comment box. But also, once we're done with those questions, Adam has a short little video talking about when he chooses to make a paddock move. So Adam, first question was from Margaret, and she asked about what you use to mow the path with to clear for the fence.
Yeah, so it kind of depends on where your stretch is going to be at. If it's a nice flat, grassy area, just a lawnmower, tractor with the mower on it. That's usually not the case. That video was actually, that was a nice, easy mower path. But typically I've got like a chest harness brush cutter with a big blade on it, and swing that back and forth, make like a 3-foot path would be good enough. And that's probably the best thing. But like if I'm going into an unknown job site, or going into the timber, I have a chainsaw with me and I have a brush cutter to go through with the chainsaw and cut out those big logs, sticks, whatever, and then go through the brush cutter and take out all the thick weeds and whatnot. And yeah, just to kind of get that perimeter, get that fence up around, and then the goats take care of the rest.
Perfect. And then Megan asked, how do you use a voltage meter when testing your fence for electricity, or do you just rely on the Energizer light on your fencer?
Yeah, I do test it when I remember to have my tester with me. But yeah, I usually test it, and you'd like to have 8,000. Like I think like Premier One has those fences, and each there's different sizes of sensors, and they have like a set amount of fences that go with it. They've got like a 30, a 60, a 120. I get the biggest one. I get the 120, and that one is, I think, 8 or 10 fences or so, maybe not even that many. But I'll put 20 fences on there. My voltage goes down, and I don't know. I can't talk for their products if that damages the batteries or the sensors. I don't know if that's bad for or not, but it does. The more fences you put on there, the lower your voltage is going to be. But if I'm at 4,000 volts, I trust my goats to respect that fence, even if 4,000 volts, and might put 20, 25 strands on there. Once it gets down below 2,000 volts, then I'm going to put a disconnect in there, and I'll separate out those clips, those braids, tie them off to each other, and then I'll start a new run. I'd rather have 2 sensors rather than like one massive sensor that runs the whole stretch, because then I can have 2 different sites going on with 2 different sensors, and then if I combine them for a big project, then I can just put a break in the fence and run them that direction. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And then Phyllis asked, have you ever lost a goat that got stuck in the netting, or had trouble with goats getting stuck in the netting?
We don't typically have issues with them, but we also train them to it, and they're on that from not the day they're born. We kid in the wintertime, so we kid February and March, and then April is kind of when they go out to pasture. And I think I've got a nice video on on my Iowa Kiko Facebook page. If not, I'll post that soon. But I make a really fine point. I've got my permanent fence running one way, and then I'll bring one way, and then I'll bring at an angle the electric net to about there. I'll leave like a 2-foot gap, so everyone has to run along that electric net fence. And basically, if they're going to escape this little paddock area, they're going to go through this area. Most of them are going to touch that fence on the way through, so they're going to learn. The adults, they're all hugging that permanent fence because they know better. They're always going to be running along that permanent fence. But the kids, they don't know any better. They're going to be putting their head through, or they're going to be walking through. They're going to get zapped, and I'm there for them to learn that. And I'll sit there with them for a couple hours the first day to learn, and after that, you don't really have any issues. If I do have anybody who's being a pain, I see that they keep having issues with it, I'll grab them by the horns and put their nose to that fence and zap them once. The horn's made of keratin. Keratin does not conduct electricity, so you can just put their lip on there. They get zapped. You don't want to do that with a really hot voltage, but they learn once, and I never have to do a goat twice. So
great. And last question here, Margaret asked, what do you use to pound the post in when it's hot or dry and hard, which is usually hot as well?
The permanent T-posts, the permanent fences that you're talking about?
I think she might have been talking about the electric netting post.
The electric net fencing. Like right now it's dry out, and so putting that into a hard compacted area or like a dry clay, if you just stick that in and you either wiggle back and forth or kind of like a stirring motion, you will penetrate through that soil with just a simple single spike. The double spikes, like I mentioned, like you can step those in, but if it's too hard for that, you're going to start bending them. And then, it starts out with 2 spikes, and eventually it's going to start bending them like that, and they're going to be fighting each other trying to go into the ground. But yeah, the single spike, I just kind of get down on there and stir it around. Eventually it sticks in the ground. Gravel is a pain. Like you can't really go through gravel, and of course concrete. So I do make little, I'll take like a 4x4 block and I'll just simple drill out a hole in it. And then cause I'm going across the yard and then there's like a concrete driveway, then I will put that 4x4 block there with a hole in it, put that post spike through it, and that'll hold it up for just, driveway's not going to be that big. You're not going to be going through a big concrete parking lot. You're just going to need to make it through a little gravel driveway or a concrete driveway, and then you're set. But otherwise, yeah, hard dirt, clay, just stir it around or wiggle it back and forth, and it should go through. It does get to be a pain if you do that a lot, but usually in areas that aren't, like if you're in an area that's like a lawn that's mowed day after day after day, that's going to be drier ground. But if you're going to like a pasture that's had, 18-inch tall grass on it, that's holding in the moisture, and it's going to be a little bit better conditions for putting that post in the ground.
Oh, that's a great tip. I like the 4x4 block. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah.
Mel had asked, is only the top wire energized?
On those electric net fences, I think those have 9 strands on the 35-inch. Everything is hot except for that bottom. The bottom black wire is not hot, and that's because it's always touching the ground, always touching the grass. So that's always it's just basically a plastic poly wire with no conduction through it.
All right, perfect. And then, I see Margaret was replying to that. So I think that's all the questions we have for the electric netting. So if Megan can show us the Paddock move video, and then we can talk a little bit about that and wrap up.
All right.
Thanks, Adam.
All right, so this was a graze that we just moved off of. It's pretty short. I probably would have moved off a little earlier if I could have, but they basically they're on this, about 200 goats on this for about a week or so, and so it got pretty grazed off. I like to move them off when it's about 50% forage. Graze that down to 50%, it boosts out and keeps the leaves going. If you get down below 50%, it wants to quickly reproduce before it dies, and so it sends out a seed and doesn't put that leaf growth on. So if you look over across this 2-track here, that's what they were on. That's about 20 acres that the same goats were on for about a week. That was about perfect, and so 20 acres and moved off in a week, put on to 12 acres, and that's kind of the difference. Just a little, about half as many acres, the same amount of goats, but that's a good stage to pull them off, and it's got a little bit of regrowth there. But then moved on to this, hit a little too hard, and we fenced off this. There's some berries in here. This is a job, a grazing job. So the person had wild berries they want to go pick, so we just fence off the berries. So you can kind of see this is what a lot of this would look like without having the goats on it. This whole place we've been on for about 3 years, coming back and forth to it, and that's what a lot of this kind of looked like before the goat showed up. But yeah, like I said, about 50% growth is a good time to pull the animals off, whether it's cattle or goats or sheep. But yeah, and that helps the roots. The roots will go deeper that way too.
Great, thanks for that. Quick question, how do you determine your paddock size? Is it based on geography? Is it based on the amount of forage, both?
There's a lot of different things that go into that. I mean, your rainfall, your time of year, all kinds of different factors. I kind of have a general rule of thumb: 100 goats eat about an acre a day. But again, that's going to vary from if you've got a grass pasture, a brushy pasture, a straight timber. Timber is really nice for the first year or two, the first couple grazes. But once they go through there and they knock out all that brush, there is nothing left in there for them. It's just trees, a canopy way up high, and then no grasses down below because it was all just brush. And so now you just have a bunch of dead skeletons of brush and honeysuckle and autumn olive, multiple rows, that kind of stuff. So there's not that much forage left at that point. But yeah, so It all just kind of depends on what time of year and the forage availability to see how often you're going to move them. Like that job, it was a 20 acre. The first section was 20 acres, but most of that was timber. And then the second 12 acres was mostly grass, but it's not the highest quality grass. It's not, it's kind of a short grass. There's different soil types too. So there's a lot of things that play into it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I'm sure over time, as you get used to that land and understand the growth patterns and the weather changes and so forth, you have a better feel for that.
Exactly.
Wonderful. Well, it doesn't look like we have any other questions, so I appreciate everyone sticking through with a little extra time here. It's a ton of really great ideas and tips, and I know after doing this video, I actually came home and used a couple of the tricks on my own electric netting. So definitely a lot of things to take in there. So again, Adam, I want to thank you for taking the time to put this together and share what you know. And I always appreciate that you're willing to share the things that you've learned and the things that haven't worked as well. Did you have any closing thoughts that you wanted to share?
Yeah, I mean, just if anybody has any questions, I know there's probably more people who are going to watch this after it's recorded and posted. If you have any questions, just feel free to shoot me a message through Facebook to my personal account, or I've got my Iowa Kiko Goats Facebook page, and then there's Blue Collar Goatscaping as well. But any of those resources, shoot me a message, and I hopefully be able to answer some of your questions.
Well, fantastic. Well, again, we appreciate you taking the time. And Megan had thrown a link to an evaluation in our in the comment box, so please fill that out. I know we're doing a drawing for some PFI merchandise for those that enter. So I hope everyone has a great afternoon, and we'll see you at the next virtual field day.